Honored guests, esteemed speakers, and distinguished attendees, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Haya Natsheh, and on behalf of the Palestinian Return Centre, I welcome you all to this critical event today under the title, Naming Genocide, the Global Responsibility for Gaza. We gather here today at a time of unprecedented urgency, a moment that demands not only reflection, but decisive decision and action. Gaza is experiencing an ongoing catastrophe, one that has been unfolding before the world in real time. The scale of destruction, the deliberate targeting of civilians, and the relentless siege are not just tragedies. They constitute violations of international law, as increasing legal voices have warned, acts of genocide. But genocide does not come in a vacuum. It is enabled by complicity, by silence, and by impunity. The purpose of this conference is to break this cycle, to name what is happening for what it is, to hold perpetrators accountable, and to demand that the world meets its moral and legal responsibilities. Today, we are privileged to be joined by leading voices in international law, human rights, journalism, and advocacy. People who have spent their lives confronting injustice. Their presence here is a testament to a growing global consensus. Gaza cannot be forgotten. Palestine cannot be erased. And justice cannot be delayed. Our discussion today will be structured across three key panels. First panel is Genocide and International Law, Obligations and Accountability. Second panel is Voices from Gaza, Lived Realities and Resilience. Third panel is International Solidarity, Turning Advocacy into Action. This is not just a gathering of experts. It's a call to challenge the normalization of Palestinian suffering. It's a declaration that those complicit in war crimes and genocide must be held accountable. It's a reaffirmation that justice for Palestine is not an aspiration. It is a legal and moral imperative. The Palestinian people have endured over 75 years of dispossession, occupation, and violence. But history has taught us that the arc of justice bends when people force it to. PRC believes that this conference is part of that force. It is part of a broader effort to ensure that our voices do not just document the crimes of today, but shape the justice of tomorrow. I would like to thank all the students' unions, the amazing students' unions of British universities who collaborated with us to support this event. And I would like to thank you all for being here, for lending your voices, your expertise, and your solidarity. May today not just be a conversation, but a step towards accountability, justice, and an end to the ongoing Nakba. Thank you all. I will now give the floor to one of the great speakers we have today who will open or kick us all off with some opening remarks. Laurel Borno, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the Palestine Return Centre and to the co-panelists and the audience for your attention today. Greetings also to the 7 million Palestinians who remain steadfast in Gaza, within the Green Line and in the West Bank, in all of historic Palestine, and the more than 7 million Palestinians also in forced exile. And a word as well to future generations who may come across a recording or a transcript of this event in an archive or a museum somewhere, perhaps someday in a free Palestine. My hope is that this gathering will serve as an act of resistance, however small, through its preservation of knowledge and the amplification of Palestinian ideas, agency, and perspectives in a time of scholasticide and epistemicide in Gaza. To open today's conference, I want to situate us by offering some thoughts on the importance of naming and global responsibility, two of our themes for today. Today is day 505 of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but Palestinian grievances did not begin with the genocide. It's year 17 of Israel's illegal blockade of Gaza, but Palestinian grievances also did not begin with the blockade. We're in year 57 of Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and that too was not the beginning. To understand the Palestinian lived experience requires reckoning with the way in which Israel was established, on top of Palestine, on top of Palestinians. We must go back to the origins of the ongoing Nakba 77 years ago. While the Nakba began as an event in 1948, during which the majority of the Palestinian population was expelled from the majority of the Palestinian geography by Zionist paramilitary and later Israeli forces, it evolved into a process which at its core has involved the continued forced displacement of Palestinians from their lands and homes for the benefit of Jewish settlement, sometimes more slowly and sometimes more quickly. Like so many Palestinians, I insist on the ongoing nature of the Nakba because it most accurately reflects the Palestinian lived experience, which has been one of ongoing catastrophe since the implementation of the Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine. As part of this process, Zionists systematically and systemically stripped Palestinians of their rights and attempted to destroy Palestinian society through the destruction and depopulation of hundreds of Palestinian cities and villages, replacing them with non-native pine trees from Europe, which had a disastrous effect on the local environment. They fragmented a singular society into smaller groups, each with its own level of access and subject to different levels and forms of oppression. This remains a central part of the Palestinian experience today. There's not a single Palestinian who doesn't have a Nakba story in one form or another in their family. It's a universal concept used by Palestinians to describe what they went through for generations. And you cannot properly know Palestinians or understand their struggle without seeking to empathize with the notion of an ongoing Nakba. Nakba also manifests in seemingly unending list of human rights violations, individual and collective, carried out against Palestinian bodies, land, livestock, and possessions by Israeli soldiers and settlers. In that sense, the genocide in Gaza is part of the ongoing Nakba. It's its latest manifestation. I recall seeing a video of an elderly Palestinian woman in Gaza early on in the genocide who explained that she had lived through all of the prior Nakbas and how this one was definitely the worst, the harshest, the most difficult. Surprisingly or not, Zionists too understand that the genocide is part of the ongoing Nakba. One of the first declarations of Israel's genocidal intent in Gaza came on October 9th, when Ariel Kalner, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, called for a second Nakba to take place in Gaza. This was followed by, in November 2023, the declaration of Avi Dichter, agricultural minister of Israel, saying that Israel was now rolling out the Gaza Nakba 2023. After Israeli occupation forces invaded Gaza in a ground invasion, we began to see the emergence of graffiti on the rubble of destroyed Palestinian homes, declaring in English Nakba 2023. So I submit to you that it is essential to use the language of Nakba because this is how Palestinians understand the totality of their condition. And while occasionally Zionist leaders and soldiers will openly acknowledge the Nakba and casually and brazenly engage in calls to repeat the Nakba, the language of Nakba is more often obscured, minimized, ignored, and denied by the perpetrators. But it's not just the language of Nakba which is denied. Essentially every terminology which is used by Palestinians and global society to describe the interactions of Palestinians with Zionism, what it looks like in its material manifestations, how the system has physically harmed Palestinians, has been dealt with in the same way by the perpetrators. So we hear denials of the analysis that Zionism is a colonial ideology, although it was never a secret that the Zionist aim of establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, which did not have a majority Jewish demography, was lauded as colonial in nature by its founder and leaders. It was also accepted in media and public discourse that this is what was proposed. I recall the 1899 New York Times headline proclaiming that Zionists decided to colonize Palestine, using exactly that terminology. There are also denials of the claim of illegal occupation and apartheid, when there is widespread consensus today amongst Palestinians, first and foremost, states, the International Court of Justice, and all major international human rights organizations, including Israeli human rights organizations, that Israel is carrying out an illegal occupation of Palestinian land and oversees an apartheid regime, and in so doing is denying the Palestinian people their right to self-determination. And of course, concerning our main topic today, the genocide, it continues 16 months in to be denied by the perpetrators and their sponsors, who want you to believe that you have not seen what you saw every single day for the last 16 months. So the point is to insist on the importance of using the proper language to narrate the Palestinian lived experience, even if it makes the perpetrators and their sponsors uncomfortable. Genocide is supposed to make us uncomfortable. And if there is discomfort in the fact that Palestinians are enraged about being bombed in their tents while sleeping with their families after being expelled from their homes multiple times across generations, the solution is not to try to distort reality by centering the discomfort of the perpetrators or the apologists, but to try to undo the structure of chronic harm that has been inflicted upon them. And this brings me to the theme of global responsibility. In the panel on international law, we will explore, legally speaking, the obligations of states and citizens in a situation of genocide. In the next panel, we will hear from voices on the ground. And in the last panel, our panelists will address the ways to turn outrage into action. How do we fulfill our global responsibility, legal and moral, to prevent, stop, and punish genocide? For the purposes of this introduction, however, I want to insist on the importance of global responsibility at this moment, where we are 1 month into what commentators are calling the first phase of a, quote, fragile ceasefire that went into effect on January 19th, 2025. This fragile ceasefire has in fact not been a ceasefire at all, for the simple reason that Israel has not ceased firing on, killing, or injuring Palestinians. As of a few days ago, Israel had violated the ceasefire 266 times, killing at least 132 people in Gaza alone since January 19th, and injuring over 900. There have been dozens of other violations, including failing to allow the agreed number of humanitarian aid trucks, 600 per day, into Gaza, restricting the evacuation of Palestinians in urgent need of medical care to far below the agreed number. In parallel, Israel has ramped up its destruction of Palestinian cities and refugee camps in the West Bank. We're now witnessing what Israel has dubbed Operation Iron Wall, a la Jabotinsky, in areas like Jenin and Tulkarem, announced merely 2 days after the alleged ceasefire went into effect in Gaza. A few days into this operation, Israeli occupation forces displaced 15,000 Palestinians from the Jenin refugee camp. A few days later, on January 25th, an Israeli sniper killed 2-year-old Layla al-Khattab in a village near Jenin. Layla was in her home eating dinner with her family when she was shot. Like so many children that Israeli snipers have killed in Gaza, Layla, in the West Bank, was shot in the head. 972 reported the following regarding the moments after Layla was killed. Her grandfather carried her bleeding and unconscious body into the street, only to find that it was full of Israeli soldiers and armored vehicles, while her teta screamed at them, "Why did you kill the girl? What did she do to you?" Layla's family members reported being detained and threatened by Israeli occupation forces following the incident. This is just one example. Now, we've all heard the repeated calls for forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, which have been amplified in recent days with Trump's proposal, which, by the way, is not a new proposal at all, whether from the perspective of Israel's intentions in the last 16 months, or in terms of Israel's modus operandi since its inception as a state, or in terms of how its leaders conceived the state before its establishment. It's a historical fact that Israel was established as a Jewish majority state through a massive act of forced displacement and denial of return. And it is also very open about wanting to preserve its Jewish majority. But in order to do so, it will have to use the same kind of violence in order to artificially engineer another massive demographic shift on the land where today the number of Zionists and Palestinians is roughly equal from the river to the sea. The first step in this case was to make Gaza uninhabitable, which they largely did. Consider that they destroyed 93% of all housing units in Gaza in 15 months. But what happens now is not written. These new facts on the ground, combined with the US's total complicity, necessarily begs the question of what is next. And there are, for now, many unknowns. Will a phase 2 and 3 be agreed upon? Will Israel restart its aerial bombardment? Will Israel succeed in the forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza? If it does, will this be a slow process that plays out over several years, or one mass expulsion event? Will Israel maintain the illegal siege and limit the entry of food, water, and critical rebuilding materials, such as cement and fuel, as it already has for the last 17 years? Will Israel de jure annex the West Bank? Will it destroy 93% of the housing in the West Bank as it did in Gaza? What will be the fate of the Palestinian citizens of Israel? Are there any red lines for Israel's Western sponsors when it comes to seeking to solve the problem of the existence of the Palestinians on their land through mass atrocities? Because of these unknowns and the risk of another mass forced displacement event, whether slowly or in one full swoop, fulfilling this global responsibility to not only stop the genocide from proceeding, we have unfortunately failed to stop it from materializing altogether, but we can stop it from continuing, and begin to undo the ongoing Nakba so that the Palestinian right of self-determination may be realized. And this is essential. So as we listen to our panelists, I encourage everyone to reflect on the knowledge that you gain in this space and think about how to use it, how to share it in our communities to build that unstoppable power of a global solidarity movement. Thank you.